Audra Renwick, 35, never imagined she would see her parents standing in a courtroom demanding custody of her son. The same parents who had slammed their door in her face 20 years ago when she was 16, pregnant and terrified. Now they were claiming to be devoted grandparents with rights to her child, a child they'd never bothered to meet. But what they didn't know was that Audra had been preparing for this moment since the day her water broke alone in a shelter for homeless teens. Before I continue my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments so I can see how far this family drama is reaching. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to see how this family betrayal unfolds, and how karma finally came knocking on my parents' door. Now, let's dive deeper into how my picture-perfect family shattered overnight. Growing up in Claremont, Connecticut, everyone thought the Renwicks were the ideal American family. My father, Richard Renwick, was a respected cardiologist at Claremont Memorial Hospital, and my mother, Eleanor, served as the chairwoman of numerous charity organizations. Our Tudor-style home on Maple Hill Drive hosted elegant dinner parties for the town's elite, and twice a year we posed for professional family portraits that my mother proudly displayed throughout our house. My older brother Theodore was the golden child varsity quarterback, straight-A student, and early acceptance to Princeton. And then there was me, Audra, the difficult younger child who somehow never quite measured up. From the outside, we appeared flawless. My father's colleagues praised his surgical skills and bedside manner. My mother's social circle admired her impeccable taste and organizational abilities. At church every Sunday, we sat in the third pew perfectly dressed and smiling. We were the family others aspired to be. But behind closed doors, our family operated on conditional love. My parents didn't just have high expectations, they demanded perfection. My father rarely spoke to me unless it was to critique my academic performance or remind me that Renwicks excel in everything they do. My mother monitored my appearance obsessively, scheduling appointments for teeth whitening when I was just 12, and commenting on my weight at every meal. "Remember, Audra, no one likes a girl who lets herself go," she'd say, while spooning exactly 3 ounces of grilled chicken onto my plate. Theodore had learned to navigate their expectations flawlessly. He understood the unspoken rules achievements were expected, and therefore barely acknowledged, while mistakes were unforgivable and endlessly dissected. I watched him transform into whatever version of himself would earn their momentary approval, and I both envied and pitied his ability to shapeshift so effortlessly. I was different. Something in me resisted their mold. When my mother enrolled me in pageants, I deliberately answered questions wrong. When my father insisted I take advanced biology as preparation for pre-med, I submitted a science fair project on the environmental impact of hospital waste, a direct challenge to his hospital's practices. Small rebellions, but enough to brand me as the family disappointment. My parents' method of discipline was unique and devastating: emotional withdrawal. If I failed a test or gained a pound, my mother would simply stop speaking to me for days. My father would look through me as if I were invisible. In the Renwick household, the silent treatment was the supreme punishment, and they wielded it masterfully. By the time I turned 15, I'd developed a carefully constructed persona for school, the quiet, smart girl from the perfect family. My few friends never visited our home. I couldn't bear for them to witness the Arctic chill that often settled between my parents and me. Instead, I spent time at their houses, soaking in the warmth of families who argued openly but loved unconditionally. It was during sophomore year that I met Jason Caldwell. Unlike the preppy, ambitious boys my parents would have approved of, Jason was artistic and thoughtful. He worked after school at his father's auto repair shop and spent weekends photographing abandoned buildings on the outskirts of town. When he first approached me in AP English asking to borrow my notes, I felt seen in a way I never had before. Our relationship began slowly: study sessions at the library, coffee at the local diner, long conversations about books and dreams. Jason listened when I spoke, actually listened without evaluating or judging. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was auditioning for someone's approval. With him, I could simply be. Of course, I kept Jason a secret from my parents. He didn't fit their blueprint for my future with his ripped jeans and lack of Ivy League aspirations. When I needed to see him, I'd tell my parents I was studying at the library or working on a school project. In retrospect, they probably didn't question my excuses because they were relieved to have me out of the house. By winter, Jason and I were inseparable. He showed me how to use his vintage camera, and I helped him improve his writing. We carved out a private world where neither of us had to pretend. And inevitably, our emotional intimacy led to physical intimacy. We were careful, or at least we thought we were. The signs appeared gradually: missed periods, morning nausea, tender breasts, but I dismissed them, trapped in the denial that often afflicts teenagers facing life-altering possibilities. It was Jason who finally purchased the pregnancy test, holding my hand as we waited for the result in the bathroom of a gas station halfway between our homes. 2 pink lines. Undeniable. That night, sitting in Jason's car, overlooking the town lights, we talked for hours. He immediately offered to marry me, to get a full-time job at his father's shop, to support me and the baby however he could. His certainty was both comforting and terrifying. At 16, marriage seemed as unimaginable as parenthood. "What about your parents?" he asked, eventually voicing the question I'd been avoiding. I stared through the windshield, watching the town I'd grown up in glitter below us. "They'll disown me," I said simply. Jason squeezed my hand. "You don't know that. They're your parents. When they realize this is happening, they'll step up." His words revealed the fundamental difference in our experiences. Jason came from a home where mistakes were met with sighs and solutions, not silent condemnation. He couldn't comprehend parents who would choose their reputation over their child. "You don't understand," I whispered. "I've disappointed them my whole life, just by being myself. This," I gestured toward my still flat stomach, "this is unforgivable." For a week, I walked around in a fog, attending classes and family dinners like a sleepwalker. Jason urged me to tell my parents, arguing that delay would only make things worse. But I knew what awaited me the moment I confessed. I was calculating, planning, preparing for the aftermath of my revelation. I began researching shelters and support programs for teen mothers. I gathered my important documents, birth certificate, social security card, immunization records, and hid them in my school locker. And then, the decision was taken from me. During a routine laundry inspection, my mother found the pregnancy test box I'd carelessly hidden at the bottom of my wastebasket. That evening, when I returned from studying with Jason, my parents were waiting in the living room, their faces masks of cold fury, the empty box sitting between them on the coffee table like a bomb about to detonate. "Sit down, Audra." My father's voice was clinical, the same tone he probably used to deliver terminal diagnoses to patients. I perched on the edge of the sofa, hands trembling in my lap. The living room, with its pristine white furniture and carefully arranged art books, had never felt more like a sterile operating theater. "Explain this." My mother pushed the empty pregnancy test box toward me with a single manicured fingertip, as if touching it directly might contaminate her. There was no point in lying. The evidence was literally in their hands, and my body would soon provide additional proof. "I'm pregnant," I said, the words hanging in the air like smoke. The silence that followed was so absolute I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, marking seconds that stretched painfully. My father stood and walked to the window, his back rigid. My mother's face drained of color, then flushed with anger. "Who is the father?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "His name is Jason, Jason Caldwell." My mother's eyes narrowed. "Caldwell? The mechanic's son? The one who drives that horrible old car?" It was exactly the response I'd expected, immediate judgment based on status rather than character. "Yes, he's a good person. He wants to help, to be involved." My father turned from the window, his face contorted with disgust. Involved, a teenage grease monkey with no future wants to be involved with my daughter's mistake? Absolutely not. Richard, my mother interjected, suddenly composed, her social planning skills activating. We need to handle this immediately. I'll call Dr. Winters tonight. She can fit Audra in tomorrow morning. We'll say it's a female issue, very private. No one needs to know the specifics. It took me a moment to understand what she was suggesting. You want me to have an abortion? It's not a matter of want, Audra, it's necessary. You're 16 years old. You have your entire future ahead of you. This situation would ruin everything we've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I corrected. This is my life, my body, my baby. My father's laugh was hollow. Your baby. You can't even take care of yourself. You think you can raise a child? On what? With what? Jason and I will figure it out. His dad. Stop. My father slammed his hand on the mantel, making the family photos jump. I will not have my daughter shacking up with some auto mechanic's son, living above a garage, disgracing this family name. I stood up, suddenly angry. Is that what you're worried about? The precious Renwick reputation? Sit down, Audra, my mother hissed. No, I need you both to listen to me. I'm keeping this baby. I don't expect you to understand or approve, but I need your support. My parents exchanged a look I'd seen before, the one that always preceded their unified front against me. There are two options here, my father said flatly. One, you terminate this pregnancy, focus on your education, and we put this unfortunate episode behind us. Two, you persist in this delusion of playing house with the Caldwell boy, in which case you are no longer welcome in this home or in this family. Despite expecting this ultimatum, hearing it spoken aloud knocked the wind from me. You would throw out your own daughter, your grandchild. Don't be dramatic, my mother snapped. We're offering you a chance to correct a mistake before it derails your entire life. What would people say if they knew? My father added. Think of how this would affect Theodore's college applications. Think of my patients, your mother's position on the hospital board. Their concerns were entirely self-centered, focused on appearances rather than my well-being or the life growing inside me. In that moment, I saw my parents clearly, for perhaps the first time, not as the intimidating architects of my existence, but as deeply flawed, image-obsessed people incapable of unconditional love. I'm keeping my baby, I repeated, my voice stronger. My mother stood up, smoothing her cashmere sweater. Then you have until tomorrow morning to pack your things. Take only what belongs to you, nothing purchased with family money. Mom, please, I am not your mother if you make this choice, she said, each word precisely enunciated. You will not contact us. You will not use our name as a reference. You will disappear from our lives as completely as if you had never existed. My father nodded in agreement. We'll inform the school that you're transferring to live with a relative out of state. Your decision, your consequences. They left me alone in the living room, retreating upstairs without another word. I sat frozen, surrounded by photographs of a family that had never truly existed. That night I packed everything I could into my school backpack, and one duffel bag: clothes, a few books, my laptop, the $243 I'd saved from birthdays and babysitting jobs. As instructed, I left behind the iPhone. They'd purchased the designer clothes my mother had insisted upon, the jewelry given for achievements rather than affection. At dawn, I called Jason, who came immediately to pick me up. My parents remained upstairs as I left, not even emerging to say goodbye. The last thing I saw as Jason drove me away was Theodore watching from his bedroom window, his expression unreadable. He didn't wave. Jason took me to his parents' modest home, where his mother Linda opened the door in her bathrobe, took one look at my tear-stained face and bags, and simply said, "Come in, honey. Let's get you settled." The Caldwells' reaction couldn't have been more different from my own parents'. There was no talk of disgrace or reputation. Instead, they immediately focused on practical matters: prenatal vitamins, doctor's appointments, school options. Linda, a nurse at the community clinic, knew about programs for teen mothers. Jim, Jason's father, offered me a part-time job doing paperwork at the garage. You can stay here as long as you need, Linda told me that first morning over breakfast. We don't have much, but we take care of our own. For 3 weeks, I lived with the Caldwells, experiencing for the first time a household where love didn't come with conditions. But despite their generosity, I knew I couldn't impose indefinitely. The Caldwell home was small, with Jason already sharing a room with his younger brother. And a part of me, the part shaped by years of my parents' judgment, felt I needed to prove I could stand on my own. When I learned about Harmony House, a shelter for pregnant and parenting teens that offered education and job training, I made the difficult decision to move there. Jason was devastated, interpreting my choice as rejection, but I needed to build my own foundation, independent of anyone else's support. The day I moved into Harmony House marked the beginning of my true education. Harmony House occupied a renovated Victorian building on the outskirts of Bridgeport, about 30 miles from Claremont. The 3-story structure with its peeling paint and sagging porch looked nothing like the pristine home I'd left behind. Inside, 12 bedroom spaces were divided by thin walls that did little to muffle the sounds of morning sickness or midnight crying. The communal bathrooms featured industrial fixtures, and the dining room served simple, nutritious meals on a strict schedule. It was institutional, living at its most basic, but it offered something my parents' home never had: safety without judgment. My first night there, I lay on a narrow twin bed with scratchy sheets, listening to the unfamiliar noises of strangers moving through shared spaces. A girl sobbed quietly in the room next door. Someone's radio played soft R&B down the hall. The baby inside me, barely showing yet but undeniably present, seemed to pulse with the reality of our new circumstances. "We'll be okay," I whispered, placing my hand on my stomach. "We'll build something better." Harmony House operated on a structured system designed to prepare young mothers for independence. Residents attended school, participated in parenting classes, and contributed to household chores. Each girl received counseling and developed a personalized exit plan with goals for education, employment, and housing. My caseworker, Denise, was a former teen mother herself, who had fought her way through college while raising a daughter. During our first meeting, she reviewed my file with raised eyebrows. "Doctor's daughter, AP classes, perfect attendance. You're not our typical resident," she remarked. "I'm not a typical anything anymore," I replied. Denise smiled, the corners of her eyes crinkling. "Good. Typical is boring. Now, let's talk about what you want your life to look like a year from now, 5 years from now." What struck me most about Harmony House was the absence of shame. The girls came from vastly different backgrounds, some from poverty and neglect, others from circumstances more like my own, but within those walls our common experience united us. We were all starting over, all learning to envision futures different from what we'd planned. I continued my education through Harmony's partnership with an alternative high school program. My pregnancy progressed normally, though, without the private OB/GYN my mother would have insisted upon. Instead, I received care at a community health center where medical students performed ultrasounds and measured my growing belly with gentle hands. Jason visited twice weekly, bringing small gifts, a stuffed animal, prenatal vitamins, books about baby development. He attended parenting classes with me and painted a second-hand crib he'd found at a yard sale. But there was a new distance between us, a fragility in our connection that hadn't existed before. My decision to live at Harmony rather than with his family had hurt him, and though he never said so directly, his wounded pride manifested in subtle ways: canceled visits, shortened phone calls, vague references to parties I wasn't attending. By my 7th month, his visits had dwindled to once every couple of weeks. The last time he came, he sat awkwardly on the edge of my bed, staring at his hands. "Dad's shop is struggling," he said finally. He had to let 2 mechanics go. "I'm sorry to hear that," I replied, sensing what was coming next. I've been thinking about enlisting. Military would give me training, steady pay benefits. He glanced at my stomach, then away. For both of you. I understood then that he was offering me a blueprint for our future marriage, military, housing, healthcare for the baby. A respectable solution to our situation. It wasn't entirely unlike my parents' abortion proposal, a predetermined path someone else had chosen for me. Jason, I said gently, I don't think that's the right answer for either of us. His face flushed. So what is the right answer? You living in this place indefinitely. Me working at Dad's failing garage forever. Our kid growing up without what? Without married parents, without a normal home. I placed my hand on my belly, feeling a strong kick. There's no rulebook here. We're writing our own story. He left that day looking defeated, and I didn't hear from him again until 3 days after our son was born. By then he'd already signed his enlistment papers. Elijah Theodore Renwick entered the world after 18 hours of labor, during which my only support came from a Harmony House staff member and a rotating shift of hospital nurses. He weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces, had a shock of dark hair, and gripped my finger with surprising strength the moment he was placed on my chest. Looking into his face, a perfect blend of Jason's strong jaw and my wide-set eyes, I felt a love so fierce it almost frightened me. This was not the detached performance-based affection I'd grown up with. This was primal and unconditional, a love that asked for nothing but the chance to protect and nurture. I named him Elijah, meaning my God is Yahweh, a nod to the strength I'd found in my faith during the pregnancy. His middle name Theodore was both an olive branch to my brother and a reminder of the family history that would always be part of him, whether they acknowledged him or not. Jason visited the hospital briefly, holding his son with the careful awkwardness of someone handling explosive material. He brought a small stuffed dog and a card signed by his parents, but he couldn't meet my eyes when he told me he was leaving for basic training the following week. I'll send money when I can, he promised, and I'd like to see him when I'm on leave. I nodded, too exhausted from childbirth and too focused on the newborn in my arms to argue or plead. As he left, I realized I felt no anger, only a dull sadness for what might have been if circumstances had been different. After Elijah and I were discharged, we returned to Harmony House, where I was now assigned a slightly larger room to accommodate the crib. The other girls cooed over the baby, offering advice and hand-me-downs with the solidarity of those walking the same difficult path. At night, when Elijah woke hungry or uncomfortable, I would rock him by the window, looking out at the sleeping city. Sometimes I imagined my parents in their king-sized bed in their perfect house, wondering if they ever thought about the grandchild they'd rejected. Did they lie awake picturing his face? Did they regret their ultimatum? Or had they truly erased me from their consciousness as they'd promised to do? During those quiet night feedings, I made silent promises to my son. I would never make my love conditional. I would celebrate his uniqueness rather than trying to mold him into some predetermined ideal. I would create for him the kind of home I'd always longed for. One built on acceptance, honesty, and the freedom to be imperfect. By the time Elijah turned 1, I had earned my GED and secured a part-time position as a receptionist at a dental office near Harmony House. My exit plan was taking shape. I'd applied for subsidized housing and was taking online community college classes in business administration, studying late into the night after Elijah fell asleep. Denise, my caseworker, had become something of a mentor. "You're one of our success stories waiting to happen," she told me during our monthly review. "You've got the drive, now you just need the opportunity." That opportunity came unexpectedly. One of the dentists, Dr. Leena Patel, noticed my efficiency with scheduling and my ability to calm anxious patients. When her office manager gave 2 weeks' notice, she offered me the position. "It's full-time with benefits," she explained. "The pay isn't amazing, but there's room to grow. And I'm flexible with hours for single parents. I raised 2 kids on my own after my divorce." The job meant I could finally leave Harmony House and rent a small one-bedroom apartment. It wasn't much, just 600 square feet with thin walls and temperamental plumbing, but it was ours. The day we moved in, Elijah toddled from room to room, delighted by the echo of his voice in the empty space. I unpacked our few possessions, arranging them carefully to make the apartment feel like a real home. That night, I sat on our second-hand couch, watching Elijah sleep in his portable crib, and felt something close to contentment. Working for Dr. Patel proved educational beyond office management. She took an interest in my community college studies and encouraged me to consider a healthcare administration degree. "You've got a head for systems and people," she observed. "There's good money in healthcare management, and it's stable." Under her guidance, I transferred to a 4-year program at Southern Connecticut State University, taking most courses online but attending in-person classes twice weekly, while a colleague's teenage daughter watched. Elijah. Between work, school, and motherhood, I existed in a perpetual state of exhaustion. There were nights I fell asleep over textbooks, mornings I had to choose between showering and eating breakfast. But each small achievement, an A on a difficult exam, a positive performance review, Elijah's developmental milestones fueled my determination. On Elijah's 4th birthday, we celebrated at a local park with a few friends from his daycare. As I watched him blow out the candles on his superhero cake, I realized how far we'd come. My son was healthy, happy, and secure. I was halfway through my bachelor's degree, had been promoted to practice manager at the dental office, and had even started a modest savings account. We weren't wealthy by any means, but we were stable, something I hadn't dared to hope for during those first desperate months. That evening after the party, I received an unexpected email. The sender's name made my heart stutter: Theodore Renwick. For a long moment, I simply stared at my phone, unable to open the message. In 4 years, I'd had no contact with my family. I'd sent a birth announcement to my parents' address after Elijah was born, a simple card with his name, birth date, and a small footprint, but had received no response. Eventually, I'd stopped looking for their cars whenever I ventured near Claremont, stopped scanning crowds for my mother's distinctive posture or my father's silver hair. Finally, I tapped the email open. "Audra, I hope this finds you well. I've thought about reaching out many times over the years but lacked the courage. I'm sorry for that and for many other things. I'm in the final year of medical residency at Boston General. I'll be in New Haven next month for a conference and wondered if we might meet. No pressure, just coffee if you're willing. Theo." My brother had always been Theodore to my parents, never Theo. The nickname was a small but significant indicator that he'd changed, or at least that he was presenting a different version of himself to me. I debated not responding. My life had achieved a delicate equilibrium that could easily be disrupted by reconnecting with my past. But curiosity and a lingering sense of connection to my only sibling led me to reply with a brief agreement to meet. The cafe we chose was neutral territory, a place neither of us had frequented before. I arrived early, securing a corner table where I could watch the door. When Theodore walked in, the sight of him was both familiar and jarring. He had our father's height and build, but moved with less rigidity. His hair was longer than our parents would have approved of, and he wore casual clothes rather than the preppy uniform of our youth. He spotted me immediately, his face breaking into an uncertain smile that reflected my own ambivalence. As he approached, I noticed the dark circles under his eyes, the hallmark of medical residency. "Audra," he said, simply, as if testing whether the name still fit. "Hello, Theodore, or is it Theo now?" He sat down across from me. "Theo, please. Theodore feels like someone else." We ordered coffee and navigated through stilted small talk about the weather and the cafe's pastries, before finally addressing the elephant between us. "How is your son?" he asked, his voice catching slightly. "Elijah is wonderful. He's bright, creative, stubborn, a complete handful, and the best thing that's ever happened to me." I pulled out my phone, hesitated, then showed him a recent photo of Elijah at the beach, his dark curls wild in the wind, his smile revealing a missing front tooth. Theo stared at the picture longer than necessary. "He has your eyes," he said finally, "and my attitude, unfortunately." His preschool teacher calls him determinedly independent. A smile flickered across Theo's face. Sounds familiar. The conversation flowed more easily after that. I asked about his medical training, and he told me he'd chosen pediatric oncology, a specialty our father would have considered less prestigious than cardiology. Theo, in turn, listened attentively as I explained my work and studies, showing genuine interest rather than the condescension I might have expected from a member of my achievement-oriented family. Eventually, we circled back to the past. "Do they ever mention me?" I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice. Theo's expression clouded. "Rarely. When they do, it's usually in the context of warning, 'Remember what happened to your sister.' But I think they wonder. I've caught Mom looking at families with small children in public spaces, her expression, difficult to read. Are you still close with them?" He laughed without humor. "Define close." "I visit on major holidays. We talk about my career, their social engagements, safe topics. After what happened with you, I became even more the perfect son, at least on the surface. It was easier than fighting. Until the pediatric oncology decision, that was my first real rebellion. Dad didn't speak to me for weeks." Theo twisted his coffee cup between his hands. "Watching what happened to you. It changed me, Audra. Slowly at first, then more dramatically during college. I started questioning everything, their values, their treatment of you, the way they'd raised us to prioritize appearance over authenticity. And yet you're still in their lives," I observed, without accusation. He nodded, looking ashamed. "I lack your courage. Or maybe I'm just conflict avoidant. Either way, I've chosen a middle path: limited contact, firm boundaries, but not a complete break." We sat in silence for a moment, the years of separation both dissolved and magnified by our conversation. "I'd like to meet him," Theo said finally. "Elijah. If you're comfortable with that, I'd like to be an uncle to him." The request surprised me, touching a place in my heart I'd carefully walled off. "What about Mom and Dad? Would you tell them about seeing us?" "That's your decision. If you want to keep this between us, I will. But honestly, Audra, I think they might be more receptive than you expect. They're getting older. Dad had a minor heart scare last year. These things have a way of shifting perspectives." I considered his words, feeling the weight of possibility. After all these years of silence, was reconciliation something I even wanted? More importantly, would it be good for Elijah to know grandparents who had rejected him before birth? As I walked to my car after our meeting, I felt both lighter for having reconnected with my brother, heavier with the decisions that lay ahead. I called Elijah's daycare to check on him, finding comfort in the sound of his voice, as he excitedly described the finger painting project they'd done that morning. "I love you, Eli," I told him, my throat tight with emotion. "Love you too, Mommy," he replied casually, already distracted by something happening in the background. That simple exchange grounded me, reminding me of what mattered most. Whatever I decided about my parents, about potential reconciliation or continued estrangement, the choice would be made with my son's well-being as the priority. I don't know about you, but I've been on the edge of my seat through this entire story so far. If you're feeling the same way, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and it lets me know you're enjoying these real-life drama stories. While we wait to see what happens next, I'm curious, have you ever had to make a difficult decision about reconnecting with family who hurt you? Let me know in the comments. Now let's get back to what happened after I reconnected with my brother. The years that followed my reunion with Theo unfolded with unexpected momentum. By Elijah's 8th birthday, I had completed my bachelor's degree in healthcare administration and secured a position as operations director for a growing medical group in Hartford. The job came with a substantial salary increase, allowing us to move from our tiny apartment to a modest but comfortable 3-bedroom house in a neighborhood with good schools. Theo became a consistent presence in our lives, visiting whenever his schedule allowed, and developing a genuine bond with Elijah. He never pressured me to reconnect with our parents, respecting my decision to maintain distance. Occasionally he would mention them: my father's retirement from surgical practice, my mother's scaled-back social obligations due to arthritis, but he did so carefully, gauging my reactions. Jason remained peripherally involved, sending irregular child support payments and visiting a few times a year when his military duties allowed. He had re-enlisted after his first term, and was now a career serviceman stationed primarily overseas. Elijah enjoyed these visits but didn't seem particularly affected when they ended. To him, Jason was more like a friendly uncle than a father figure. When Elijah turned 10, I was offered an executive position with a healthcare startup in Boston, an opportunity that would double my salary and provide equity in a promising company. The decision to relocate wasn't easy. We'd established roots in Connecticut, and moving meant Elijah would change schools and leave behind his friends. But the professional advancement was too significant to ignore. "What do you think?" I asked Theo over dinner after explaining the offer. "I think it's amazing," he replied without hesitation. "You've earned this, Audra. And selfishly, I'm thrilled you'll be in Boston. We'll be in the same city for the first time in decades." Theo had completed his residency and joined the pediatric oncology department at Boston Children's Hospital, establishing himself as a dedicated physician with a particular gift for communicating with young patients and their families. Our move to Boston marked the beginning of what I came to think of as our golden period. Elijah adapted quickly to his new school, making friends and joining the robotics club. I thrived in my new role, applying my hard-earned organizational skills and first-hand understanding of healthcare systems to help build something innovative. On weekends, Theo often joined us for outings to museums or baseball games, the three of us forming a small but solid family unit. By Elijah's 15th birthday, our lives had achieved a kind of symmetry I'd never imagined possible. My son was now the same age I'd been when my pregnancy began, but his adolescence looked nothing like mine had. He was confident, academically successful, and surrounded by supportive adults. Where I had felt constantly judged and found wanting, Elijah knew he was loved unconditionally. The startup I'd joined had been acquired by a larger healthcare corporation, and my equity stake translated to financial security I'd never dreamed of. I purchased a Victorian townhouse in Cambridge, established college funds for Elijah, and even began a small foundation that provided scholarships for teen parents pursuing higher education, a way of giving back to the community that had supported me when I needed it most. Professionally, I'd become something of a success story, featured in healthcare industry publications, and invited to speak at conferences about innovative management practices. I never shared my personal history in these professional settings, but the resilience I'd developed as a teen mother informed every aspect of my leadership style. It was after one such speaking engagement that I received the letter that would upend our carefully constructed life. The envelope arrived at my office, addressed in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, elegant cursive, that somehow managed to appear both beautiful and severe. For several minutes, I simply held it, feeling its weight in my hands, wondering what could possibly have motivated my parents to break their 2-decade silence. Finally, in the privacy of my corner office overlooking the Boston skyline, I opened it. "Dear Audra, I hope this letter finds you well. Theodore has informed us of your professional success, and more importantly, of our grandson's well-being. While we recognize that this communication may be unwelcome after so many years, circumstances compel us to reach out. Your father has been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's disease. While his prognosis is reasonably good with proper treatment, the diagnosis has prompted us to reevaluate certain life choices. Chief among these is our estrangement from you and your son. We would like to request a meeting at your convenience. There is much to discuss, including the possibility of establishing a relationship with our grandson. We understand that you may have reservations, and we respect whatever boundaries you wish to establish. Sincerely, Eleanor Renwick. The letter was quintessentially my mother, formal, controlled, revealing little emotion while making significant requests. I read it several times, searching for some indication of genuine remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. I found none. That evening, I showed the letter to Theo over dinner at his apartment. "Did you know about this?" I asked, watching his reaction closely. He sighed, setting down his fork. "About Dad's diagnosis, yes. About the letter, no. Though I did tell them a few months ago that you and Elijah were thriving. I thought they deserved to know that despite their worst predictions, you've built an exceptional life. And now, they want to meet Elijah." I folded the letter, tucking it back into its envelope. After 15 years of complete silence. "What are you thinking?" I stared out his window at the city lights. "I'm thinking that I don't owe them anything. I'm thinking that Elijah has grown up without grandparents and has turned out wonderfully. I'm thinking that introducing my parents into his life now could be confusing or even harmful." Theo nodded, accepting my reasoning without challenge. "And what will you tell them?" "Nothing for now. I need time to consider what's best for Elijah." The question haunted me over the following weeks. I watched my son, now taller than me, his voice deepening, his interests expanding from robotics to philosophy, and tried to imagine how meeting my parents might affect him. Would they judge him as they had judged me? Would they try to mold him into their image of a proper Renwick? Or had age and illness genuinely changed them? I discussed the situation with my therapist, a practice I'd maintained since my early days at Harmony House. "They disowned me when I needed them most," I explained. "Now they want access to my son because they're facing their own mortality." "That may be true," she replied thoughtfully. "But consider this: what would meeting his grandparents mean for Elijah? Not for you, not for them, but for him." It was a perspective I needed to hear. In my determination to protect Elijah from potential rejection, I'd been making decisions without his input. At 15, he was old enough to have a say in whether he wanted to meet his maternal grandparents. That weekend, I showed him the letter and explained in age-appropriate terms the circumstances of our estrangement. Elijah listened with the serious expression he adopted when processing complex information. "So they kicked you out because you were pregnant with me," he clarified, his brow furrowed. "Yes. They gave me an ultimatum: abortion or leaving home. I chose you." He was quiet for a long moment. "Do you regret it, keeping me?" The question broke my heart and cemented my conviction that I'd made the right choice all those years ago. "Never," I said firmly, holding his gaze. "Not for a single moment. You are the best decision I ever made." Relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by curiosity. "What are they like?" "My grandparents." I tried to describe my parents as objectively as possible, acknowledging both their flaws and their strengths. "They can be critical and status-conscious, but they're also intelligent and accomplished. Your grandfather was a respected cardiologist, and your grandmother ran several successful charity organizations. And now my grandfather is sick, yes. He has Parkinson's disease. It's a neurological condition that affects movement. It's not immediately life-threatening, but will progressively worsen." Elijah considered this information with the empathy that always made me proud. "That's tough. Do you think that's why they want to meet me now? Because he's sick?" "Probably partly that. Facing illness often makes people reconsider their priorities." "I think I'd like to meet them," he said finally. "Not because I need grandparents or anything. I'm curious, that's all." His decision didn't surprise me. Elijah had always been open to new experiences, secure enough in his existing relationships to risk exploring complicated ones. Still, I was determined to protect him from potential hurt. If we do this, I told him, there will be ground rules. The meeting will be brief on neutral territory. I'll be present the entire time. And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, we leave immediately. No questions asked. He agreed to my conditions, and after several days of internal debate, I responded to my mother's letter. Eleanor and Richard, I received your letter regarding Dad's diagnosis. I'm sorry to hear about his health challenges. Elijah has expressed interest in meeting you both. I propose a brief meeting at the Cambridge Public Garden next Saturday at 11 a.m. Please understand that this meeting does not constitute a commitment to ongoing contact. That will depend entirely on how the interaction proceeds and what seems best for Elijah's well-being. Audra, my mother's response arrived by express mail the very next day, accepting the proposed meeting with what seemed like unprecedented flexibility. It was the first indication that perhaps something had indeed changed. The morning of our scheduled meeting dawned clear and cool, a perfect early autumn day in New England. Elijah dressed with unusual care, choosing a button-down shirt rather than his typical weekend t-shirt. I noticed his attention to appearance but said nothing, recognizing his instinctive preparation for inspection by the Renwicks. We arrived at the public garden 15 minutes early, giving us time to select a bench near the lagoon, where the famous swan boats operated during summer months. I pointed out landmarks to Elijah, grateful for the distraction of casual conversation as my anxiety mounted. They're very punctual people, I told him, checking my watch. They'll arrive exactly at 11, not a minute before or after. Sure enough, at precisely 11 o'clock, I spotted them entering the garden from the Arlington Street entrance. Even from a distance, I recognized my mother's erect posture and my father's measured stride, though he now walked with the assistance of a cane, a visible manifestation of his diagnosis. As they approached, I felt Elijah tense beside me. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. Remember, we can leave any time. My parents stopped a few feet from our bench, and for a long moment we simply regarded one another across the divide of 20 years. My mother looked older, but still elegant in a tailored pantsuit, her silver hair cut in the same classic bob she'd worn throughout my childhood. My father had aged more dramatically, his once commanding presence diminished by the subtle tremor in his right hand, and a slight stoop to his shoulders. Audra, my mother said, her voice betraying a hint of emotion she would once have suppressed. Thank you for agreeing to meet, I nodded, standing to make introductions. Mom, Dad, this is Elijah. Elijah, these are your grandparents, Eleanor and Richard Renwick. My mother's gaze fixed on Elijah with unmistakable hunger. My father's eyes widened slightly, perhaps recognizing family features in his grandson's face. It's a pleasure to meet you, Elijah, my mother said formally, though her voice trembled slightly. My father extended his less affected hand. Young man, he said simply. Elijah, displaying the social grace I'd worked hard to instill in him, stood and shook their hands politely. It's nice to meet you too, he said, his voice steady despite the extraordinary circumstances. We sat on adjacent benches, an arrangement that felt symbolic of our cautious reconnection, close enough for conversation but maintaining a physical boundary. The initial exchange was predictably awkward, filled with safe questions about Elijah's school and interests. My parents listened with apparent fascination as he described his robotics competitions and recent fascination with existential philosophy. He's clearly inherited the Renwick intellect, my father observed, the first direct reference to shared genetics. He's his own person, I corrected gently but firmly. As the conversation continued, I observed subtle changes in my parents' behavior. My mother, who had always been rigidly proper, leaned forward eagerly when Elijah spoke. My father, typically dismissive of pursuits outside his narrow definition of success, nodded with genuine interest at Elijah's explanation of his robotics project. After about 45 minutes, I signaled that our time was coming to an end. Elijah has a study group meeting this afternoon, I explained, providing a graceful exit. My mother's expression fell momentarily before she composed herself. Of course. Education must come first. She hesitated, then added, "Perhaps we might meet again, maybe dinner at our home in Cambridge." I was surprised to learn they had a home nearby. "You've moved to Massachusetts," my father nodded. After my diagnosis, we wanted to be closer to specialized medical care, and to Theodore, he added with a meaningful glance at me. I felt a flash of irritation that Theo hadn't mentioned this development but pushed it aside. "Let me think about dinner." This was a significant first step. As we prepared to leave, my mother reached into her handbag and produced a small box. "We brought something for Elijah. If that's permitted," she added, looking to me for approval. I nodded, curious. Elijah accepted the box and opened it carefully. Inside was an antique pocket watch, its gold case gleaming in the sunlight. "This belonged to your great-grandfather," my father explained. "It's traditionally passed down to the eldest grandson in each generation." The gesture was meaningful, an acknowledgement of Elijah's place in the family lineage they had once denied. I felt a complicated mix of emotions: appreciation for their attempt at connection, resentment that it had taken so long, and protective concern about what their true intentions might be. On the walk back to our car, I asked Elijah for his impressions. "They're kind of formal," he observed, "but not as scary as I thought they'd be." "Grandpa seems sad." "The Parkinson's is difficult for him," I acknowledged. "He was always very controlled and independent." "Do you think we should go to dinner at their house?" I considered the question carefully. "Would you like to weigh?" He shrugged with adolescent nonchalance that didn't quite mask his interest. "Maybe. I think they're trying, and it's not like I have a ton of family." His perspective, untainted by my history with my parents, gave me pause. Perhaps I needed to separate my past wounds from his present opportunity to know his grandparents. Over the following weeks we had 2 more meetings with my parents, first a lunch at a restaurant, then dinner at their Cambridge brownstone. Each interaction was civil, even pleasant at times. My parents were clearly making efforts to connect with Elijah, asking thoughtful questions about his interests, and refraining from the judgmental comments that had characterized my upbringing. With each meeting, I felt myself gradually lowering my guard, allowing myself to consider the possibility of a limited but genuine reconciliation. My parents seemed different, perhaps softened by age and my father's health concerns, or perhaps simply determined not to repeat past mistakes. After our third successful meeting, I began allowing Elijah to spend occasional afternoons with them without my supervision. They took him to museums, introduced him to their friends, and my father even began tutoring him in advanced mathematics, a subject in which Elijah excelled and I struggled to help with. By spring, 6 months after our initial reunion, a tentative new normal had established itself. We celebrated holidays together, exchanged birthday gifts, and maintained regular contact. While my relationship with my parents remained somewhat formal, they clearly adored Elijah, and he enjoyed their attention and the window they provided into his family history. Then came the phone call that shattered our fragile peace. It was a Tuesday evening in April. Elijah was upstairs doing homework, and I was reviewing quarterly reports for work when my phone rang with Theo's number. "Audra," he said without preamble, his voice tight with tension. "Have you checked your mail today?" "No, why?" "You need to. Right now. Mom and Dad have done something unforgivable." My stomach dropped as I retrieved the mail I'd ignored earlier. Among the bills and advertisements was a thick envelope from a law firm I didn't recognize. I opened it with trembling fingers and began reading the legal document inside, my disbelief mounting with each paragraph. It was a petition for grandparental rights and partial custody of Elijah, filed by Richard and Eleanor Renwick. "How could they do this?" I whispered into the phone, shock giving way to a familiar feeling of betrayal. "After everything, I had no idea they were planning this," Theo said quickly. "I swear, Audra, They never mentioned anything about legal action. I scanned the document, focusing on the key claims that they had established a meaningful relationship with their grandson, that my father's deteriorating health created urgency for regular visitation, that it was in Elijah's best interest to have court-mandated time with his grandparents to ensure continuity of family connection. They're claiming that I've been unreasonably restrictive with access to Elijah, I said, my voice rising, after I voluntarily allowed them back into our lives. After 20 years of complete absence, Theo's sigh carried the weight of our shared history. Dad's condition has worsened recently. His tremors are more pronounced and they've adjusted his medication twice. I think they're panicking about time. That doesn't justify this, I snapped, anger displacing shock. Legal action, without even talking to me first. This is exactly why I was cautious about letting them back into our lives. After ending the call with Theo, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the legal papers as if they might transform into something less threatening. The familiar Renwick approach to problem solving, using power, money, and influence to get their way, hadn't changed after all. They'd simply hidden it under a veneer of reconciliation until they'd gained enough access to make their move. I needed to tell Elijah before he heard it from someone else. Setting aside my own tumult of emotions, I called him downstairs and explained the situation as gently as possible. Your grandparents have filed for legal visitation rights, I said, watching his face carefully. This means they want a court to decide when you spend time with them, rather than us making those decisions as a family. Confusion clouded his expression. But why? We already see them pretty often. I think they want guarantees. With your grandfather's health declining, they're worried about having enough time with you. I hesitated, then added, they may also be concerned that if they upset me, I might restrict their access to you. Would you do that? The question gave me pause. I would never use you as a weapon, Eli. But yes, if I felt they were being manipulative or harmful, I would limit contact. That's my job as your mother, to protect you even from family. He processed this with the thoughtfulness that sometimes made me forget he was still a teenager. So what happens now? I'll hire a lawyer. We'll respond to their petition. Eventually, there might be a hearing where a judge listens to both sides. I reached for his hand. No matter what, I promise to be honest with you through this process. Your feelings and opinions matter enormously. The following weeks unfolded in a blur of legal consultations and emotional conversations. I hired Catherine Mendez, an attorney specializing in family law, who reviewed the case with calm efficiency. Grandparents' rights cases are challenging, she explained during our first meeting. Massachusetts law requires grandparents to prove that denial of visitation would cause significant harm to the child. Given that your son had no relationship with them for 15 years and has been developing well, they face an uphill battle. But they have resources, I countered. My father was a prominent physician. They're well connected in certain circles. Catherine nodded, understanding. Resources matter, yes. But courts primarily consider the child's best interests. The fact that they abandoned you when you were pregnant and never sought contact until recently will significantly weaken their case. With Catherine's guidance, I filed a formal response opposing the petition. Meanwhile, all direct communication with my parents ceased on legal advice. Elijah, caught in the middle, expressed confusion and disappointment about the sudden halt to visits with grandparents he'd just begun to know. Can't you guys just talk? He asked one evening, his frustration palpable. This seems so unnecessary. I wish it were that simple, I told him. But once lawyers get involved, direct conversations become complicated. I did try Eli. I called them when we received the petition, but they referred me to their attorney. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in June. As the date approached, I vacillated between righteous anger and exhausted resignation. Part of me wanted to fight to the bitter end to make my parents face the consequences of their actions once again. Another part, the practical manager who'd learned to seek efficient solutions, wondered if some compromise might be possible, one that would spare Elijah the trauma of a protracted legal battle. The morning of the hearing, I dressed with particular care, selecting a conservative navy suit that projected competence and stability. As Elijah and I ate breakfast, my phone pinged with a text from Theo. "I'll be there. Second row your side." His unwavering support throughout this ordeal had been a revelation. The golden child had definitively chosen his sister over his parents, a development that would have seemed impossible in our youth. The courthouse was an imposing limestone building in downtown Boston. Catherine met us in the lobby, her confidence reassuring as she guided us to the appropriate courtroom. As promised, Theo was already seated dressed in a suit rather than his usual hospital attire. He stood as we approached, embracing me tightly before greeting Elijah with a fist bump that had become their ritual. "Mom and Dad are already inside with their attorney," he murmured. "Dad's using the wheelchair today." I nodded, steeling myself for the confrontation. "Elijah will wait out here with you until the judge calls for him if needed." When we entered the courtroom, my parents were seated at the table opposite ours. My mother's expression was impassive, but my father looked diminished, his tremor more pronounced than I'd previously seen. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of sympathy quickly overtaken by resentment as I recalled the legal documents they'd filed. As attorneys made preliminary statements, I studied my parents more closely. My mother maintained her rigid posture, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her handbag. My father, once the embodiment of medical authority, now leaned heavily on his cane, his movements uncertain. They had aged dramatically in the months since our reconciliation began, or perhaps I was only now allowing myself to see their vulnerability. The judge, a silver-haired woman with penetrating eyes, reviewed the case summary before addressing the courtroom. "Before we proceed with formal arguments, I'd like to ask if the parties have considered mediation. Cases involving family relationships often benefit from less adversarial approaches." Our attorneys exchanged glances. Catherine leaned toward me. "It's your decision. Mediation would be private, less confrontational, and might result in an agreement you can live with. But it's not mandatory." I hesitated, weighing options. The prospect of airing our family's painful history in this public forum suddenly seemed unnecessarily destructive. Whatever their failings, these people were Elijah's biological grandparents, and their time, especially my father's, was limited. "We're willing to consider mediation, Your Honor," I said finally. My mother's head snapped up, surprise evident in her expression. After a whispered conference with their attorney, she nodded agreement. The judge directed us to a private conference room where a court-appointed mediator would facilitate discussion. As we relocated, I caught Theo's eye across the courtroom. He gave me a subtle thumbs up, his expression a mix of relief and approval. In the stark conference room facing my parents across a polished table, I suddenly felt the weight of our shared history, the good and the bad, the irreparable harm and the possibility of limited healing. "Before we begin formal mediation," I said, surprising even myself, "I'd like to speak directly to my parents." The mediator and attorneys exchanged glances but didn't object. 20 years ago you made a choice. I began meeting first my mother's gaze, then my father's. You chose your reputation and comfort over your daughter and grandson. That was your right as parents, however painful for me. Now I'm a parent, making choices to protect my child, that's my right. The difference is that Elijah has always been my priority, not an inconvenience to be discarded." My mother flinched visibly. My father's trembling hand sought hers across the table. "Filing this lawsuit, without even attempting to discuss your concerns with me first, was a betrayal of the trust we were rebuilding. It demonstrated that fundamentally, nothing has changed. You still believe power and control are appropriate substitutes for communication and respect." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "That said, I recognize that you care for Elijah. I see how you light up in his presence, how you cherish your time with him. And I acknowledge that time is a factor given Dad's health situation." My father cleared his throat. "Audra," he began, his voice weaker than I remembered, but still carrying the authority that had once intimidated me. "We acted out of fear. Fear of losing connection with Elijah if my condition worsens, or if something in our fragile relationship with you shifts again. So your solution was to use legal force, to try to compel access to a child you showed no interest in for 15 years. The old anger flared, but I tempered it, mindful of our purpose here. "We handled this badly," my mother admitted, the concession so unexpected I almost didn't register it. "Perhaps we reverted to old patterns, using external authority rather than trusting the relationship. For that I apologize." An apology from Eleanor Renwick was unprecedented in my experience. I studied her face, searching for manipulation, and finding instead what appeared to be genuine regret. "What do you actually want?" I asked directly. "Not legally, but as grandparents." They exchanged glances before my father answered. "Regular time with Elijah, the chance to know him better, to share family history and traditions. Perhaps occasional travel together as his schedule allows. And if I agreed to reasonable scheduled visitation without court mandates, we would withdraw the petition immediately," my mother said quickly. The mediator, who had been observing silently, now intervened. "Perhaps we could outline a visitation schedule that addresses everyone's concerns." "Mrs. Renwick, what specific time commitments would feel meaningful to you and your husband?" Over the next 2 hours we negotiated a detailed agreement: bi-weekly Sunday dinners, monthly weekend activities, and inclusion in significant events, like Elijah's robotics competitions and eventual graduation. The agreement included provisions for adjusting the schedule as my father's health dictated, and explicit acknowledgement that all arrangements were contingent on Elijah's consent and comfort. By early afternoon, we had a framework that satisfied the core needs of all parties. As attorneys drafted the formal agreement, I stepped outside to brief Elijah and Theo on the developments. "So it's over?" Elijah asked. "No more court. If we all sign this agreement, yes, they'll withdraw the lawsuit, and we'll follow this visitation schedule as long as it's working for everyone." I studied his expression. "How do you feel about that?" He considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. "I think it's okay. I like spending time with them, actually. Grandpa's been helping me with calculus, and Grandma knows a lot about art history, which is cool for someone so rigid," I supplied with a small smile. "I was going to say traditional, but yeah." He grinned, then grew serious again. "But they shouldn't have sued you. That was messed up." "They were wrong," I agreed. "But sometimes people make desperate choices when they're afraid. The important thing is they're willing to try a different approach now." As we prepared to return to the conference room for the final signing, Theo pulled me aside. "I'm proud of you, Audra. You found a solution that honors your boundaries while still giving Elijah access to his grandparents. That's remarkable given our history." "I'm not doing it for them," I clarified. "I'm doing it for Elijah. And for myself, honestly. Carrying anger for 20 years has been exhausting." The final moment of resolution came when we all gathered around the conference table, pens poised over the agreement. My father, struggling with the fine motor control required for his signature, looked up at me with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "We missed so much," he said quietly. "Your graduation. Your career achievements. Elijah's first words, first steps." "Yes," I acknowledged, neither absolving nor condemning. "You did. We can't recover that time," my mother added. "But perhaps we can create something new, something better with whatever time remains." As I signed my name to the document, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. My parents had failed me catastrophically at 16, and no legal agreement could erase that trauma. But in choosing negotiation over continued conflict, I was freeing myself as much as accommodating them. The scared pregnant teenager who had once stood in their living room facing impossible choices had become a woman capable of setting boundaries, protecting her child, and still finding a path toward limited reconciliation. Outside the courthouse, Elijah, Theo, and I stood in the spring sunshine, the legal documents safely stored in Catherine's briefcase. Ice cream, Theo suggested, loosening his tie. I think we've earned it. Definitely, Elijah agreed enthusiastically. As we walked toward the nearby ice cream parlor, I glanced back at the courthouse steps where my parents were emerging, my father leaning heavily on both his cane and my mother's arm. They paused, looking in our direction, and after a moment's hesitation, my mother raised her hand in a tentative wave. I returned the gesture, not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of our shared journey from estrangement to this imperfect resolution. Then I turned back to my son and brother, the family I had chosen, and who had chosen me in return, and continued forward into the future we were still building together. Wow, what a journey we've been on together through this story. If you've made it this far, you're practically family now. I'd love to know if you've ever experienced family karma or justice in your own life, those moments when everything comes full circle. Drop your stories in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more real-life dramas with unexpected endings. Sharing is caring too, so if you know someone who might appreciate this story of family forgiveness and standing your ground, send it their way. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I truly believe that sometimes our greatest strength comes from the challenges we never expected to face. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by those who left you behind, but by how you choose to move forward.